The birth of the human race hasn't been an isolated incident. Our brief time here has given rise to conceptual facets of life specific to our own and only our own existence. Going beyond surface-level themes of the feeling of compassion for another, beyond what we recognize in our animal counterparts, or even a primal rage spawned on by the competitive field for the acquisition of resources. No, something more plagues the hearts of those who walk on two legs and call themselves a person. This inherited devil, bestowed upon us by a universe with the desire to be observed by its own embodiment, is the blessed curse of purpose. More commonly said, what is your purpose? Why are you here? A cockroach cares not for its destiny more so than it cares for finding love and a mate, at least from what we've been able to tell. This purpose is a reduction of the numerous aspects that have spanned from it: desire, hope, willpower, and so on. Those with a stronger sense of purpose and a birthright to all that life has to offer have been shown to culminate a desire that throughout history has recurred over and over again. The desire to conquest, the God-given purpose to expand one's borders and exert a claim over the earth, and in some cases, beyond the stars. Napoleon of France, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, conquerors, leaders, emperors, all with a divine manifest. That whole diatribe brings us to today's topic, empires. I believe I had the unique or defective brain structure based on how you'd like to see it, and finding joy by playing games where you stare at maps and watch them change ever slightly over the course of many hours. Can I recommend these games? In most conversations, no. It's like explaining how staring at a spreadsheet of a simulated business is revolutionary gameplay. Crusader Kings 3 is one of these examples of a multi-hour map-changing game that is by far one of my favorites. I won't dote on the complexities of the game, however what I will mention is that you select a ruler of a given time of your choosing. The end goal is to expand one's dynasty and become well known, or maybe it's not. What I mean by this is that Crusader Kings, or CK as I'll refer to it from now on, is a game all about choice. A choice to expand one's kingdom to empire status or enjoy the domestic nature that comes with being a singular person of some royal status. More importantly, you can conquer the world minus the majority of the southern hemisphere, but CK is unique in the aspect that the game only continues as long as the player wants it to continue. That is, if your empire is in a lasting state. As you see, there aren't really conditions to ensure victory, but there are a litany of ways to fail, or in other words, experience loss conditions. Overwhelming declarations of independence that create a series of secession wars, dissatisfaction from one's citizens requiring taxes to be lightened that ultimately lead to financial collapse, plagues that eat away at the empire from within, the inability to produce a viable heir, and thus your multi-century lineage dies out. So many unique, and what I've described as, to me, enjoyable ways to watch an empire of gold collapse and tarnish. CK is only a footnote in demonstrating how empires are a lot like people. They have personalities personified in their strengths and weaknesses, as well as their goals and ambitions. With that little note out of the way, I believe we should take a look at some actual empires, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. We'll be taking a look at both fictional and non-fiction, just to get a healthy mix, mostly non-fiction though.
It is the 41st millennium. For more than 200 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth.
Kicking us off, as it's just had a major installment in the video game market this year under the title Space Marine 2, I believe the Imperium of Man requires a bit of focus. The Imperium of Man is a fictional empire that stems from the Warhammer 40k franchise. 40k over the years has gone through a series of retcons and revisions to the lore, but we'll just be focusing on the latest and most up-to-date information. This information for more notable events and happenings are almost always released to the public through novels. I'll reference a few of these, but with over 90 official published titles, we have to consolidate. The timeline of humankind in 40k uses reality as a baseline, but has drastic differences. With 40,000 years of history at the very least, we'll be jumping around quite a bit. Let's start, at the beginning. During the Neolithic Age, roughly 8,000 years before the birth of Christ, there were a collection of special individuals who were deemed as shaman. These shaman had a latent connection with the metaphysical and could read, connect, and source power from a higher realm of psychic energy called the warp. Those with a connection to the warp would be deemed as psychers later on in history. The warp's energy is dictated by the emotions of sapient beings located in the material world. During the age of the shamans, emotions would rise and fall, keeping the warp in balance. However, as the numbers began to rise and expansion took place, these emotions grew stronger, and thus their presence in the warp did as well. Shamans would reincarnate, or more importantly, their abilities would be passed on to others as they faded. Eventually, the malevolent emotions would spawn the early demons of the warp that would begin to consume these shamans and prevent the natural cycle of reincarnation from occurring. The shamans were a vital role in humanity's evolution thus far, and prevented what would be humanity's fall into chaos, or in other words, the negative forces of the warp. With numbers dwindling, the remaining shamans gathered together to determine a needed course of action before extinction took place. The collective decided that they must pull their remaining psychic energy into a singular incarnation of their total power. In an act of great self-sacrifice, thousands of shamans cast their lives away for something greater. This allowed their souls to be merged into a single soul, manifesting in the warp. The soul that need not fear being devoured by demons would arguably become the most important person in the 40k franchise. 1 year after the deaths of the shaman, a child would be born in ancient Turkey to Anatolian herders. This child would go on to become the Emperor of Mankind. Traveling and watching the human race, the incredible psychic powers would emerge as he grew. During this time, history would progress as it's written in our own world. However, due to the growing nature of the human race and other sentient beings of the galaxy, things would begin to unfold, and the Great Game would begin. The emotions of the galaxy reaching a climax would give birth to powerful warp entities, manifestations of particular emotions with near, if not direct, godlike power. The first being Khorne. Khorne, the chaos god of emotions like wrath, rage, anger, and hate, would come to embody violence and war, sometimes referred to as the Blood God, who sits on his skull throne. Whether the events were the culmination of their birth or an effect stemming from it, Khorne is said to have come about during the Age of the Mongols. Tzeentch would be next, acting as the chaos god of change, knowledge, destiny, and lies, coming about sometime during the Renaissance period here on Earth. Finally, there is Nurgle, the chaos god of disease, pestilence, and decay, coming to sentience sometime during the Black Plague. Humanity would progress, and the Emperor would go on to learn from the humans, eventually beginning to aid the more beneficial societies as an advisor or figurehead, but never directly in charge, giving humanity a chance to do the right thing. The Emperor, whose psychic powers were maturing, became aware of the Chaos Gods, and the Chaos Gods became aware of him. Humanity would progress further and enter the age of technology around the 15th millennia, a golden era for prosperous growth and exploration. During this period, humans would establish the first interstellar civilizations linking back to Earth, now called Terra. This was done by using the warp as a gateway to achieve faster-than-light travel across the stars, utilizing the abilities in the growing number of psychers now present to navigate. This was also done with the help of fully autonomous sentient robots called the Men of Iron. Most notably, however, was the creation of the Standard Template Construction Database Library, referred to as an STC, a device that held all known data of mankind and how to reconstruct any technology, as well as an adaptive AI that changed the designs based on environmental factors and limitations. Truly, the magnum opus of the pre-Imperium humans. All was going well until boom, it all immediately fell apart. The sentient robot men declared a war on all humans Terminator style. The warp ways being used for travel opened the realm to warp storms, pure chaos energy disturbances that prevent entry and exit of planets, most notably Terra. These warp storms allowed the forces of the gods of chaos to reign upon unsuspecting planets. Civil war raged, and it was the end of a golden era. The entire network of mankind had been severed from another, and this would be known as the Age of Strife. The Emperor, seeing that mankind was over its head, decided he would no longer sit on the sidelines, ultimately waiting for extinction, but instead guide humanity towards salvation and towards greatness. The Emperor would begin on Terra during what would be called the Unification Wars, overthrowing the warlords who had come about by mastering the old ways of technology lost millennia ago. During this period, several innovations would take place, as well as the adoption of key characteristics of the Empire we see today. Valdor, Birth of the Imperium, released in 2019, gives us a more personal look at the early days of the Empire, with its central focus on the Unification Wars. In the early days of conquering Terra, the Emperor partnered with several others to give him an advantage over the warlords. At first, there were just murmurs of a force who donned gold armor, marked by the eagle sigil crested by lightning, but before long, they couldn't be ignored. The growing Golden Army was different from the warlords who had called Terra theirs. He claimed no religion. In fact, he discouraged any. His warriors were handcrafted brutes, brought through genomancy, and like his sigil, dubbed Thunder Warriors. He placed value on science and restoring the old ways of the age of technology. It wasn't long before Terra was nearly conquered. During this time, the Emperor found himself in need for stronger soldiers, not just stronger, but smarter, more gifted. He knew of the Chaos Gods and how while the Thunder Warriors had served him well, they would be no use for the forces of the Warp. Thus, using his genecraft once again, he created 20 Primarch sons, 20 sons of the Imperium, of the Emperor, and they would be crucial in the next step of the Imperium of Man. However, before the Primarchs can be put to use, the Chaos Gods tore open the Warp and scattered the sons across the galaxy on different human planets. Several traitorous acts later, from within, and the Imperium of Man was ready to reach out to the stars, no longer headed by Thunder Warriors, but by the Adeptus Astartes, a revised and superior version beyond all merits, otherwise known as Space Marines. The Unification Wars have come to an end, and the Great Crusade can begin. A lot happens from this point. The Emperor finds some of his Primarch sons, all but 2 of the 20. A major event occurs called the Horus Heresy, where one of the Primarchs, Horus, who is convinced by the Chaos Gods, convinces 8 others to join the forces of Chaos, while 9 loyalist Primarchs fight for the Emperor. The Emperor is gravely wounded and placed upon the Golden Throne, a highly advanced life support system that requires the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers a day to keep the Emperor alive. Luckily, this sacrifice is not made in vain, as most of the now Demon Prince Primarchs are out of commission, as well as along with most of the Loyalists. Now, you're pretty much caught up to the very surface level of 40k. Of course, there's been some developments, but I'm kind of waiting to see how that goes before talking on it further. Let's talk more, though, about the intricacies found within the Empire, as the origin story I've given you will make this all go by much smoother. The Imperium of Man is a vast multi-planetary empire that prior to the Emperor's current state was an absolute monarchy. With the Emperor sat on the Golden Throne, the form of government has taken on more of a theocratic oligarchy vibe. The Emperor, even in the presence of the Primarchs, is second to none. However, there are dicative branches that control several facets of the Imperium of Man. Currently, one of the Primarch loyalists who has come back into frame, Rabute Gilliman, is overseeing things as regent. Below him is the Inquisition and the High Lords of Terra. The High Lords of Terra, also known as the High Lords of the Imperium, are the ruling body of the Imperium of Man in the Warhammer 40k universe. They consist of the most powerful and influential leaders from various factions, including the Adeptus Terra, the Inquisition, the Echelary, and the Space Marine chapters, which we'll talk more on. Their primary objective is interpreting and enforcing the will of the Emperor, just in different ways. The Inquisition is a removed and secret government organization given authority equal to that of the High Lords of Terra. Their job is to sniff out and report the taint of chaos prior to it being allowed to go too far, which in the Imperium's eyes is at all. Moving on to the secondary level of the Imperium, we'll start with the Adeptus Terra. The Adeptus Terra is more so a categorization or umbrella organization of more notable subsect branches like the Adeptus Astartes, or in other words, the Space Marine Legions. They oversee 5 other groups and basically are the middleman between the High Lords of Terra and those who actually go out and fight chaos, transport resources, navigate the stars, and so on. Next is the Adeptus Mechanicus, based on Mars. This subsect is almost an independent nation-state of the Imperium. And just because I have to focus on 2 other empires, I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. In short, they're a tight-knit group of cyborgs who believe the machines have souls called machine spirits. They live on Mars, which is called a forge world, as they're the leading advancers of technology in the Imperium. They used to be separate, but believe the Emperor is something called the Omnisire, as he demonstrated his psychic abilities to repair a great machine with ease. Mars, in the 40k universe, is home to the Void Dragon, a Xenos, or in other words, alien, who is immensely powerful and is sealed on the planet after a fight with the Emperor. Next is the Adeptus Ministorum. Despite being opposed to religion, the Imperium of Man is highly religious, with its Gothic overtones taking inspirations from Catholic architecture. Its use of Latin phrases, its staunch opposal to the worship of the polytheistic pantheon of chaos, all illustrate this. The paradoxical nature of the Imperium is most apparent with this sector, as the Emperor has a long history of disavowing worship of himself. As he states, he is no god. Lorcan, one of the Primarchs who oversees the Wordbearer Legion, came from a zealous religious background and actually turns to chaos for this reason, as if the Emperor will not accept his worship, he will find a god who will. The Adeptus Ministorum enforces what is called the Cult of the Emperor, and were created following his seating on the Golden Throne. Their controlled worlds are called Shrine Worlds. Next are the tertiary subsects of the Adeptus Terra we discussed earlier. The Adeptus Astronomica is charged with training psychers to maintain the Astronomicon, a metaphysical beacon used to navigate space at faster-than-light travel via warp space. There are 10,000 of which 1/10 are selected to feed the Golden Throne every day. The Adeptus Astrotelepathica is charged with finding psychers and putting them to use for the Imperium of Man, whether that be sending them to the Astronomica or in some other nefarious use. The Imperius Administratum is exactly as it sounds. It's the bureaucratic section of the Empire that oversees the quadriary and final sections of the Imperium that totals in 6, but we're still on the tertiary tier, so let's continue. The Adeptus Arbites are cops. They enforce the law of the Imperium of Man. More importantly, they act as judge, jury, and executioner because despite all the cool space magic occurring, there are just regular people living day to day. And those regular folks break and follow laws same as you and me. The final group of the third tier of the Empire are the Adeptus Custodes. These golden gods are given the duty of protecting the Golden Throne, acting as the elite fighting force of the Emperor himself. They are perfect and are to Space Marines what Space Marines are to normal people. Sometimes referred to as the Legio Custodes, created in secret by the Emperor prior to the Unification Wars. The Custodes are absolute perfection incarnate. They don't have off days, they are 100% perfect, immune to the corrupting nature of chaos. Finally, we move on to the 6 divisions of the bottom tier and base of the Imperium structure. Rogue traders are a faction of the Imperium composed of high-ranking nobility. They are the explorers of uncharted space and given free rein to take advantage of the resources available on untapped planets. This freedom allows for rogue traders to act in multiple roles such as declaring wars, ruling planets, or enforcing diplomatic relations. The role of rogue trader is passed down through lineage from parent to offspring. The Officio Assassinorum is charged with training Imperial assassins. These assassins vary in several degrees of specialty but are all deadly nonetheless. Often used to kill political rivals or rebellious politicians, they are the silent blade of the Imperium, as sending in the Adeptus Astartes or Space Marines isn't always the most effective option. The Imperial Commander Branch was created to designate rulers of planets under the banner of the Empire. It's basically just the division that places planetary governors in charge. The Imperial Fleet is the totality of the Empire's spacefaring vessels, divided into 3 categories and 1 subcategory: the Imperial Navy, the Merchant Fleets, and the Civil Fleets, with the Navis Nobilite Fleet also attached to this division. The Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard, are just normal people who act as the Empire's fighting force. Lastly, but not least, is the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. Sectioned into 20 legions with a representative Primarch to be called their leader prior to the Horus Heresy. Following the events of Horus's actions, the Astartes are divided into chapters, with roughly 1,000 being present. These are the forefront of humanity's defense against chaos and Xenos alike. They are genetically altered, sometimes psychically gifted, and near unstoppable. Each chapter specializes in their own field, with a few notable examples being the Grey Knights, who are the #1 Chaos Slayers, or the Ultramarines, who hold a special place as being some of the top of all the legions due to heroic acts. With that said, you now have a general idea of the Imperium of Man's structure. To finalize our study of this vast galactic empire, let's recap and add some info. The Imperium of Man is a multi-planetary-wide empire that places technological advancement, super soldiers, and fanaticism at its forefront. Ruled by all means of the definition, a dead god king who was put there by 9 of his own children, with a preference to gothic overtones and brutality. The Imperium of Man is not a good place to live. In fact, it's awful. Zealous beliefs, crowded hive worlds, and enemies beyond comprehension. If it's not the forces of chaos, it's Xenos. Tyranids, a race of a hive-minded beast made up of claws and maws. Necrons, cybernetic augmented race who can alter reality itself. A perverted race of elves who gave birth to the most recent installment in the Chaos God pantheon, Slaanesh, Chaos God of pleasure and excess. The horrors are never ending. In the 40k universe, you are a number, disposable. Might equals right, and even when you're on top, a great game is being played where your downfall is just a stepping stone. They did it to the God Emperor himself, now imagine what they can do to you, a mortal. We move on. Next we focus on the history of the Mali Empire of West Africa. By the way, this is real, like in the real world, so no Xenos or Space Marines or dragons and jazz. There is a Sorcerer King, but we'll get to that. The Mali had a humble beginning as a collection of tribes and then a kingdom prior to full-on empire status. We begin our tale somewhere around the 11th to 12th century. Well, actually we need to start earlier, around the 8th to 10th century, as we can't focus on the Mali Empire without giving first a brief look and explanation of the Ghanaian Empire. The Ghana Empire began when Egyptian travelers settled in West Africa, bringing more advanced weapons and knowledge to the land, allowing for the conquest of their new surroundings. Ghana, originally called Ouagadougou, would become Ghana as we know it because Ghana literally translates to gold, and as we'll talk about, gold makes up the lifeblood of the West African empires. The Ghana Empire thrived, developing advanced tax systems, departments of ministries, and laws of succession. Known for its vast gold reserves and its rich cultural impact, it became a central trade hub of the Sub-Sahara, a jewel of the Gold Coast. During this period and the centuries following, gold would become so prevalent that it was a commodity rather than a luxury. Every man, woman, and child had access to gold, and the supply would only grow with time from this point on. Things went well for Ghana until the Almoravids, a group further to the north, began invading the Ghanan Empire, seeing weak points in the military might of this economic giant. Ghana was a target because of their vast amounts of gold, but also because, though they tolerated Islam, it was not their central religion. Islam, unlike most new religions today, was a rapidly expanding force to be reckoned with, and it didn't take long since its creation at all to reach Africa. Ghana eventually became overwhelmed when the empire to the east, the Soso Empire, began to annex Ghanan territory. After Suomaro, leader of the Soso Empire who was declared a sorcerer king, demanded tribute from Ghana in the form of payment. Suomaro was known for his military prowess and more importantly in African folklore, is said to have played a magical pan flute or similar woodwind instrument that bestowed supernatural advantages to the Soso. Suomaro ruled shortly on militaristic principles, traveling further south. A leader by the name of Sundiata was able to withstand the conquering neighboring nation's forces, defeating Suomaro in an epic showdown. Prior to this event, the previously dominant Ghanan Empire was seeing a downward trend in trade due to instability, i.e. foreign raiders, and thus the traders went further south, placing them in this quickly growing fiefdom of Mali. Mali had more of economic value via a shit ton of gold similar to Ghana, but is said to have even more vast gold reserves than the trade giant of Ghana. Sundiata was a warrior prince of the Kieta dynasty, liberating the local people of the Soso Empire's control and annexing some of Ghana along with demonstrating the importance of strength in numbers to the surrounding tribes. Once all this sorcerer king business was wrapped up, an official doctrine of governance was instilled with the Korokan Fuga. This established doctrine would unite the area's tribes under one banner, the Mali banner. The Korokan Fuga would also establish a general consensus of laws throughout the land. Some notable examples of the laws or just general rules of practice were that the Kieta dynasty would always be on top, and that the Kieta lineage would rule Mali. Other interesting laws would be that men could marry at 20 and not before, as well as creating economic trade agreement standards such as 1 cow being equal to the value of 4 sheep or goats. As we'll go on to explore, the Mali Empire was a powerful economic kingdom, however it was also rather progressive socially. Women were held at a high standard in the Mali Empire and treated nearly as equals, being involved in most day-to-day ongoings, and given a value of importance. After the death of founder Sundiata Keita, who united the tribes, a royal palace slave, former slave, or respectable business client, as it wasn't entirely clear, Sakura would go on to take the throne briefly, but died on his return trip from a pilgrimage to Mecca. This occurring despite the Kieta rule that only members of the dynasty could be the Mansa, or emperor, was temporarily null during a time of political turbulence. Sakura's reign was best known for the vast expansion and growth of territory and is considered one of the most politically powerful Mansa of the entire Mali history. Soon after the death of Sakura, the most notable in my opinion, Musa would become Mansa Musa of Mali. In historical record, Mansa Musa is considered to be the wealthiest man to have ever lived, with today's estimated net worth of over 400 billion. Musa inherited the throne at an opportune time as the previous Ghanan Empire had been absorbed, making up a majority of the current state of Mali. Taking a successful pilgrimage and returning safely from Mecca, Mansa Musa during his travels would cause a drastic inflation crisis with how much wealth he was dispersing in the neighboring nation of Egypt. However, this inflation crisis showed the rest of the world how powerful Mali stood, not even being rivaled in today's world. Unlike Ghana, Mali's central religion was that of Islam, and was a strong benefit when it came to maintaining positive relations with the neighboring countries, something Ghana had experienced firsthand. Though traditionally the Empire of Mali was an Islamic state, Musa strengthened the connections with the larger Muslim world. Culture bloomed, borders expanded, and an age of growth was occurring with the building of new mosques in cities like Timbuktu. This period of time was considered the golden age of the Mali Empire. Musa would die at an indeterminable date, with his later actions arguably being confused with those of his son, Maga, who would go on to take the throne for 4 short years. Megha would be deposed by Musa's brother, Suleiman, who would go on to ride his brother's curtails, not really doing anything of significant difference, other than strengthening the bond Musa had established with the Marinid Sultanate, or in other words, modern-day Morocco. Following the death of Suleiman, Mali would start bumping through the lineage of the Kieta dynasty, with several short-lived emperors taking place of insignificant note. Civil war, other supplies of gold, and the redirection of those previously precious trade routes due to climate change would devastate the Mali. Things would only get worse as nomadic raiders would begin attacking and capturing key cities. Eventually, the leader of the neighboring Songhai Empire, Soni Ali, who was once a vassal to the north of Mali, set his sights on the already dwindling empire. Soni Ali would be the death of the Mali Empire and the next stage of African imperialism. Mali currently exists today, and so does Ghana, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. As this is the end of the Mali Empire, I feel I owe it to you to finish out strong, so allow me to give a brief rundown on what happened to the Songhai, as clearly they still aren't a present nation today, unlike the other two. The Songhai was a prosperous empire that expanded most under Ali, who would face his own downfall due to his desire to maintain traditional African animalism, a faith that was giving way to Islam. Soni Ali would pass and his sons would go on to take the throne, only to be overthrown by Muslim nobility and scholars, as they felt they were being overlooked by Sani Baru. Eventually, Soni Ali's nephew, Muhammad, also known as Askia the Great, would succeed the throne. Muhammad, not being much of a warrior, would focus inward on the empire by dividing Songhai into provinces and establishing Islam as the official religion of the Songhai, creating religious schools and mosques. Muhammad would establish all that good stuff like trade with the Portuguese and set taxes. Eventually, however, Muhammad would be deposed by one of his sons, Askia Musa, and his other children would squabble over the throne for several years. During this squabble, the Songhai Empire would come under the crosshairs of Morocco. It was one day that Morocco would send a small force of warriors to attack the Songhai's still massive army. Morocco would come out on top in the Battle of Tondibi, as they had just gotten access to guns. The Songhai Empire would have their assets seized and become a part of Moroccan dynasty, ending a legacy in 1591. Eventually, in 1901, Africa would be set upon by European nations, most notably France in this instance, and exploited for its riches and vast resources. It was in 1960 that Mali would gain independence and become the country we know it as today. Ghana would do the same in 1957, gaining independence from the United Kingdom, and is the republic we also know it as today. So to finish off, let's recap. Ghana was a rich empire that organized the gold trade as an export and commodity, rising through power slowly and through small conquests. Through nomadic raids, tensions raised by religious differences, and finally the opportunity given to the Soso Empire, the Ghanan Empire would fall. Mali, a neighboring nation to the south, was about to face the same fate at the hands of the Soso until a warrior prince stepped forward and defeated the threat. Following the battle, the tribes and kingdoms of Mali would band together to create an empire under a set of rules. The Mali would go on to annex Ghana and their share of the gold trade, becoming one of the most prosperous nations to ever existed. Islamic and proud, the Mali Empire was looking sharp until civil wars, nomadic raiders that took key cities, and the growing previous vassal of the Songhai moved in. The Songhai, now in charge, had all the gold, trade routes, and manpower, until a firearm-equipped invading force from Morocco, paired with internal conflict, allowed for the Moroccan Empire to seize all resources of the Great Songhai. A couple hundred years of the same pattern would occur, and in 1901, Europeans would occupy Africa. In the later half of the 20th century, independence would be returned, or declared. We move on to the final empire we'll be taking a look at. If you're enjoying the video so far, leave a like, subscribe, you know, all that jazz. To finish us off strong, let's take a look at another fictional empire in the Elder Scrolls series. It's gone under a few names, but as current, I believe it is called the Cyrodilic Empire. So like the Imperium of Man or the Age of African Imperialism, we need context. The creation of Nirn, the mortal plane in the Elder Scrolls universe, or more specifically, the planet our story takes place on, Mundus, was not merely an act of divine will. It was a complex interplay of cosmic forces. The Aedra, divine beings, specifically 9 in total, played a role in the formation of the world. At the time, though, there were only 8. But to understand the world itself, we must understand the primordial dawn, and more importantly, how the universe came to be. In the beginning, it was pure chaos. Chaos being the only way to describe it, as there was no forces of order or void yet. It was just an inconceivable something. This something, this absence, would eventually give way to forces of order and chaos. Chaos as we imagine it, and not just the something chaos. Instead of being called Chaos and Order, these twin forces were named Padme, the Force of Chaos, and Anu, the Force of Order. The forces having come about gave birth to substance and created the known Arubis, or the universe of the Elder Scrolls. Eventually, these forces would give birth to ethereal souls or avatars named Anuiel, Order, and Sithis, Chaos or Void. Both Anuiel and Sithis would give rise to smaller beings embodying their own merits, the first of these lesser beings being called Lorcan of Sithis and Auriel of Anuiel. These beings would be called Et-Tata. During this time, Anuiel and Sithis would create several overlapping planes of reality during their struggle for control. Anuiel would create time, and the flow of Arubis would begin. Eventually, Lorcan, who was created by Sithis, would approach the other Et-Tata with a proposition to create Mundus, the mortal plane, where the inhabitants would be of the lesser Et-Tata's creation, or in other words, mortals. Prior to the completion of the realm of Mundus, several of the Et-Tatas would return to the higher planes, and only the 8 divines would bind themselves to the mortal realm, becoming the focus of religion, or the known quote-unquote gods of Mundus. These beings would become devised as the Aedra, acting as a force for order to maintain basic principles like time in Mundus, while the beings who left or never joined at all would be known as the Daedra, who symbolized not necessarily evil, but change. Lorcan would be destroyed after a meeting of the Aedra held at the Adamantine Tower, leaving the Divines to maintain their creation. Lorcan's body would become the 2 moons of Maser and Secunda, and his heart would be cast down to Tamriel. The 8 Divines would go on to create the native inhabitants of Nirn, the planet we had mentioned. The Elnofae were the primordial race of the elves and humans, and the Hist, giant trees, who are in turn like normal trees, but somehow are known to possess a level of sapience. This major event would symbolize the end of the Dawn Era. The beginning of the Merethic, or Mythic Era, would be characterized by the dividing and appearance of new races, aboriginal to Tamriel, called Batmer, or Beast Folk. Some of these notable races were the Khajiits and Argonians. The Aldmar, descendants of the Elnofae, on the elven side, would disperse along the land and adapt to the geographic locations and cultures that were developing, eventually becoming subsect races like Altmer, Aelids, Falmer, Bosmer, and more. In this early age, the human tribes were fragmented and vulnerable. The Aelids, an ancient civilization of elves in Cyrodiil, viewed the humans as mere cattle, subjugating them to serve their whims. This enslavement sparked the earliest seeds of rebellion, and tales of heroic deeds of legendary figures like Pelinil Whitestrake, a champion who fought against the Aelid tyranny, became folklore, inspiring future generations to dream of freedom. Pelinil's exploits were marked by brutal battles where he wielded divine power against the Aelids. His confrontations with the Aelids not only liberated but also laid the groundwork for the future Alessian Empire, a political entity founded on the principles of human rights and divine worship. This empire was founded by Alessia, who freed the humans at the time of elven control. This allowed for the newly freed human population of Cyrodiil to create the first human empire and the extensive empires we'll be focusing on going forward. Alessia's vision of a united human front against their oppressors was not solely based on her own experiences. It was a reflection of a collective yearning for freedom. Her leadership was marked by the Edict of Alesia, which formalized the worship of the 9 divines and established the empire's cultural foundation. The edict was also introduced laws designated to protect the rights of humans and other oppressed races, fostering a sense of solidarity. However, this was not without consequence. The Murukati Selective, a powerful faction within the empire, sought to impose a strict interpretation of the Alessian doctrines. This led to tensions with other human factions and even the early formation of alliances with some elven groups who sought to coexist peacefully. The Alessian Empire's reach extended beyond Cyrodiil, as they sought to expand into Valenwood and elsewhere, neighboring nations to the south, with primary inhabitants being the Wood Elves, descendants of the Altmer, and Khajiit, beastfolk with feline demeanors. The conflicts in these regions showcased the complexities of the Empire's expansions, where liberation often devolved into further oppression, creating a cycle of violence that would haunt the Empire for centuries. The Alessian civil wars fragmented the Empire, leading into a series of bloody conflicts as factions fought for dominance. During this period, notable figures emerged such as Manny Marco, a powerful necromancer who played a significant role in the civil strife. His mastery of dark arts allowed him to manipulate both the living and the dead, making him a formidable opponent. Manny Marco's influence peaked when he founded the Order of the Black Worm, a secretive organization that sought to harness the power of the dead for its own gain. His actions ignited a backlash amongst the populace, leading to a resurgence of Alessian loyalists who viewed the necromancer as a direct threat to their way of life. The civil wars weakened the empire significantly, allowing the remaining Aelid nobility to stage a resurgence. This period saw numerous battles and skirmishes as the Aelids, now reduced to scattered factions, sought to reclaim their former power. The internal strife ultimately culminated in the Battle of Glen Umbra Moors, where the Alessian forces finally achieved a decisive victory, but at a staggering cost. The Alessian Empire would ultimately fall, as it was heavily motivated by religion, and fanatic groups would emerge as the empire expanded that were unable to be quelled as the money and manpower ran thin. A 10-year war that covered nearly all of Tamriel would end with the dissolvement of man's first empire. 400 years would pass until Riem and Cyrodiil faced off against invaders from another continent called Akaviri, creating the base of a new empire. This empire was heavily noted with conflict. Several wars would be fought, most importantly with the Argonians of Blackmarsh to the east and the rulers of Skyrim, home of the Nords, to the north. This new empire was going well until Remus III died and handed the reins to another dynasty who actually were descendants of the Akaviri invaders. A man by the name of Versidue Shai would engage in a long war with other restless leaders who grew tired of paying levies into the empire, eventually holding open rebellions. Though Shai would win the conflicts and bring peace to the realm through military might, a group of assassins based out of Morrowind called the Morag Tong would eliminate Versidue. Shai's son, Savrian Chorak, would take over briefly, but would meet the same fate at the same group of assassins. In addition to the assassination of Savrian Chorak, all heirs would be killed in order to end the lineage. This ending of the dynasty would finally be the death of the Second Empire and the end of the First Age as well. This would begin the age of the Integrum, which, despite having several smaller kingdoms and empires, would mostly be composed of sheer anarchy and fighting. The Akaviri would return, and the only nation to come out on top was Morrowind, home of the Morag Tong, who then became the Dark Brotherhood that had kicked off this period. This era lasted for an unknown amount of time, as even with the creation of time, Elder Scrolls likes to jump around non-linearly, till the birth of arguably one of the most important people of Elder Scrolls lore. Tybers Septim, Talos, Ysmir, or Dragonborn are all names donned by the only person to unify Tamriel under one banner. Tybers Septim's rise was characterized not just by military conquest, but by his shrewd political maneuvering. As he united the fragmented kingdoms of Tamriel, he carefully crafted a narrative of unity and strength. His early victories in Skyrim and High Rock were instrumental in solidifying his reputation as a powerful leader. One of the most pivotal moments in Tybers' campaign was the Battle of Old Hroldan, where he faced off against a coalition of rebellious Nord clans. Tybers' ability to harness the might of the dragons through what was commonly known as the Shout would become an event chronicled in the Song of Tybers Septim. With the help of the Greybeards, a monastic order devoted to the way of the voice, he tamed the dragon Numenex, turning the tide of battle and securing the loyalty of the Nords. His unification of Tamriel was further solidified through the establishment of the Imperial cult, which promoted the worship of the 9 divines while allowing local practices to flourish. This religious approach helped assuage fears among conquered peoples, fostering a sense of belonging within the empire. Tybers Septim's legacy was multifaceted, encompassing military triumphs, cultural flourishings, and political reforms. Under his reign, the empire saw the creation of the Imperial Library, a repository of knowledge that sought to document the history of Tamriel, ensuring that the past would inform the future. This is a bit of jumping around, as the lore surrounding Talos, or Tybers Septim, is so convoluted, but I'll explain very quickly. It's theorized that Talos is actually the culmination of 3 different people, all under those names I had mentioned earlier. He also achieved an enlightened state called Chim, where he realizes he's a fictional character in the dreams of a concept called the Godhead, which is not the same as the universe, but rather the universe and all its planes are, or in made of, from the Godhead. A dreaming super god above all else who can't act on Arubis or hasn't been shown to at the very least. Talos is said to have been invited by the divines, the Aedra, to join their pantheon, as since he is not bound to keeping Mundus afloat with principles like time and morality, he can act as a more involved force. Chim allows Talos to achieve a state of power unbeknownst to anyone, as it's similar to lucid dreaming, and he uses this to change the history of the Elder Scrolls series many times. Lost? Well, yeah, so is everyone else. This is all very meta and not well understood by most fans, but it adds a mysterious aura and ties things up nicely-ish. Talos or Septim is said to have retconned portions of history which explains some events that occurred in the games never seemingly happening, or events that never occurred, now happening. In my personal opinion, Talos or Tybers Septim is meant to act as a narrative device to set the stage of present games. If something that was once established by the dev team is then contradictory to what another dev team had in mind, this can be attributed to Talos, an easy cop-out. It allows for the series to stay flexible and presents how the current status of the Empire we know has come about, and quite possibly even our own playable characters. It's no secret that when starting up a new Elder Scrolls game, we play as some no-name character with seemingly no past history, and fans have theorized that this is because we've been created by Talos to act as his avatar on Mundus, coordinating events that would be better for the Empire or the mortal plane in general. This also explains the Elder Scrolls items themselves, not just the series, as the scrolls themselves are just seemingly there with no history or knowledge to be gained. They tell of past, future, and present events and change constantly, which is reminiscent of Talos' ability to change historical events. I theorize that Talos changes time so often that they simply exist so mortals of Mundus can try and keep accurate records of what supposedly happened, which is a cool tie-in with that library that he established where the Elder Scrolls can be found. As the Empire expanded, Tybers faced challenges from both within and without. His successors, notably his grandson Uriels Septim I, struggled to maintain the delicate balance of power. Uriels' reign was marked by the War of the Red Diamond, a conflict that emerged from the struggles between various noble houses vying for influence. This war highlighted the fragility of the Empire as notable families like the House of Indoril and the House of Riddlethar sought to manipulate the central authority for their gain. The conflict ultimately culminated in the Treaty of the Two Moons, which established a fragile peace but did little to address the underlying tensions. Now bear with me now, but we jump from Uriels Septim I to Uriels Septim VII, as all the other ones in between are just fun lore pieces, and to be honest, Uriels Septim VII was our emperor for 4 of the 5 games. As the Third Era progressed, the political landscape of Tamriel became increasingly complex. The emergence of the Thieves' Guilds and spreading of the Dark Brotherhood showcased the shadier underbelly of society, as crime and corruption flourished in the shadows of the Empire's grand ambition. At some point, Uriel is temporarily imprisoned and staffed by a usurper named Tharn, but is released by a prisoner who goes on an epic 10-year journey to do so. This is the premise of Arena, the first entry in the game series. Following this, Uriel sends a champion, presumably your character in Arena, to solve a case of the Underking, who is haunting a town in High Rock, and Hammerfell. Secondly, Uriel also needs help from the player in finding a letter from the Queen of Daggerfall, which reveals the location of the Mantella, an item of immense power that Talos used to conquer Tamriel, as it allows for the control of a world-conquering brass golem called the Numidium. That was created by the Dwemer or Dwarves. The player finds this item and is given 7 options, creating the event known as the Warp in the West. The Warp in the West, a mysterious event that disrupted the power dynamics in High Rock, highlighted the fragility of the Empire's control over its provinces. This incident saw noble houses rise and fall in a matter of weeks, leaving a power vacuum that other factions were quick to exploit. The Warp in the West was Bethesda's way of addressing the 7 different endings of Daggerfall, the second game in the series. Basically, something called a Dragon Break occurred where time split into 7 paths, and all 7 of these endings occurred. At some point, they all reconvened, and all endings actually happened. Time stuff, Talos stuff, you know this by now. After the Dragon Break, Morrowind, the third entry in the series, would occur, where a semi-god named Dagoth would challenge the status quo of the Empire. However, we, the prophesized Neravine, stopped this. It's a cool game and arguably the best Elder Scrolls game for its respective time, however it's gotten a bit dated, and the events are primarily isolated because of your interference in Dagoth's plan to use a second Numidium, powered by the Heart of Lorkhan. The most notable event is the destruction of Lorkhan's heart we mentioned at the beginning. At this time, the Thalmor, a secretive society of elven supremacists who had been quietly building their influence, capitalized on this instability. Their secretive operations, rooted in elven supremacist ideology, sought to undermine the Empire from within. This era marked the beginning of a prolonged struggle as the Thalmor would eventually emerge as a significant adversary, setting the stage for the future conflicts. We then move on to the Oblivion Crisis. The Oblivion Crisis, or Oblivion, the 4th entry, marked a turning point for the Empire, as the mythic Dawn cult opened the gates of Oblivion, realm of the Daedra, and the very fabric of Tamriel was threatened. The Daedric invasion, led by Mehrunes Dagon, led to widespread devastation with cities falling to the hordes of Dagon. The once mighty Imperial legions, strained and unprepared, struggled to repel the invaders. This would also lead to the assassination of Uriels Septim VII. The assassination of Uriels Septim VII was a devastating blow to the Empire. His death created a leadership vacuum, leaving the Elder Scrolls in disarray. In this chaos, the emergence of Martin Septim, a bastard, was not just a twist of fate, it was a reminder of the Empire's enduring legacy and the potential for rebirth amidst destruction. Martin's journey was fraught with peril. The Blades, loyal guardians of the Septim Dynasty, helped him navigate the dangers posed by the mythic Dawn. Their loyalty was tested as they fought against not only the cult, but also the chaotic forces of Oblivion. To be honest, I know our character is very rarely talked about, but Martin's ash just hides in the Blade's temple while you, the player, hero of Kvatch, do the real work. The climax of the Oblivion Crisis is marked by Martin's transformation into the avatar of Akatosh, dragon god of time, and was a moment of divine intervention. As he closed the gates of Oblivion, he not only saved Tamriel, but also reaffirmed the importance of the Septim lineage. His sacrifice created a power vacuum as well that would have profound implications for the Empire in the years to come, as Martin had no heir. The Fourth Era would begin under the shadow of the Aldmeri Dominion's resurgence. The Great War, sparked by tensions between the Empire and the Thalmor, showcased the Empire's weakness. The Dominion well-organized military forces swiftly advanced, capturing key territories and exposing the Empire's vulnerabilities. The siege of the Imperial City marked a pivotal moment in the Great War. The Thalmor's ability to exploit internal divisions within the Empire allowed them to capture the city, further undermining Imperial authority. The political ramifications of this defeat resonated throughout Tamriel, as provinces began to question their allegiance to the Empire that seemed unable to protect them. The signing of the White Gold Concordant was a controversial moment for the Empire. The treaty imposed strict limitations on Talos worship, an act that ignited outrage among many citizens who viewed Talos as a symbol of their identity. This decision highlighted the tensions between the Empire's desire for peace and the deep-rooted cultural significance of Talos to the Nords and other groups. During this time, a new dynasty takes the throne, the Mede Dynasty, and we were to pick up again with our second emperor, Titus Mede II. 200 years later, and we pick up with Skyrim, the fifth and unfortunately the latest entry in the Elder Scrolls. The Stormcloak Rebellion erupted in response to the perceived betrayal of the Empire. Ulfric Stormcloak, a charismatic leader with a deep sense of national pride, became the face of the resistance, who felt disenfranchised by the Empire's capitulation to the Thalmor. This civil war became a microcosm of the larger struggles faced by the Empire. As the Stormcloaks fought for their identity, the Empire struggled to maintain its cohesion. The conflict highlighted the disparities between the central authority and the provinces, leading to a deepening sense of mistrust. As the war raged on, both sides committed acts of brutality, further entrenching the divide. The conflict drew in various factions, including the Thalmor, who sought to exploit the chaos for their own gain. The Civil War was not merely a struggle for independence, it was a fight for the very soul of Skyrim. As the Civil War raged on, the ancient threat of dragons resurfaced. The Dragonborn, a figure of prophecy, emerged as a beacon of hope against the overwhelming odds of civil strife and dragon attacks. Their connection to the dragons was not just a matter of destiny, it was a profound exploration of identity and heritage. The Dragonborn's journey was filled with challenges as they have navigated the treacherous waters of politics in Skyrim, while confronting powerful dragons like Alduin. Each victory against the dragon not only enhanced the Dragonborn's legend, but also reignited the hope for a united Skyrim. The battles against the dragon symbolized the broader struggle within the Empire. As the Dragonborn confronted these ancient foes, they also confronted with the rivalries and alliances that define Skyrim's political landscape. The dragons represented not just a physical threat, but also the remnants of an ancient history that shaped Tamriel. The Empire stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain. The Civil War continues to unfold, while the Thalmor's influence looms large over Tamriel. Yet, amidst the turmoil, new heroes emerge, embodying the spirit of resistance and the hope of a united future. The legacy of the Septim Dynasty, though extinguished, inspires many to reclaim their identities. The heroes of Skyrim, each representing different factions and belief, forge their paths in a land marked by division. Their actions reverberate throughout the Empire, hitting at the possibility of renewal and restoration. And then next? Well, we don't know what happened next, as they've spent 12 years fucking off and have just barely started on Elder Scrolls 6, so yeah. Sorry to leave on a cliffhanger, but that's how everyone else feels. Leave hate comments on their Instagram for all I care. Yes, I understand the need for new IPs, but they're working on an Indiana Jones game right now. And if that flops, we probably won't get another entry. So, as much as I love playing Skyrim 6 times, I want something new. Not to turn this into a Bethesda hate rant, but they're known for being very money-hungry idiots. With that said, I hope you've enjoyed the latest video. I've got to talk about a lot of things I enjoyed on a very surface level, and leave the rest for you all to enjoy. Go read 40k books, get into history, and be the hero of Kvatch for me. With that said, if you've enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.